There was always the must, Ali Shah. I always remember, Ali Shah, one of the five favorites, who was very Jamali and very useful to Baba, and lived in Navanagar. Baba would call him in all sorts of occasions, and he was very distinguished looking must, and he had impressive bearing, and people who didn't know thought he was some sort of a great man of the world. But the downside to that was when he had to take a pee, he would just pull up and let fire, irrespective of who was there. So it's very, very humiliating for the Mandalay. He would completely blow it. And I heard that Muhammad the Must, you remember him, he intensely disliked Ali Shah. They're both on the fifth plane. I think it was a one-way animosity. I never heard that Ali Shah reciprocated. But he would go and start backbiting Ali Shah, and he would criticize him on this very point that it was unsanitary. I mean, Muhammad the Must complaining that someone was unsanitary is the most ridiculous thing I can imagine. I mean, I don't know, sort of like, a chimney sweeper complaining that someone's clothes were dirty or something, Meher Baba's Tiffin Lectures. So this is a new collection of what we really regard as Baba's words. It's been 20 years in the making. It's a bit embarrassing how long it took. It's been a huge project, research and editing and project to come up with this volume. And I'll be talking more about the history of the manuscript and its finding and all those sorts of things in due course. But what it is a record of the talks that Baba gave to his Min Mandali in 1926 and 1927. And this is the early Meherabad period. I'll be giving this morning, actually, a history of all of this. But what we call the first long stay at Meherabad ran from January 1925 until November 1926. Then there was a little interlude, and then there was what we call the second long stay from December 1926 until May 1928. Yeah.
So with that first long stay, he started out speaking.
Right.
And so there were people who were there when he was speaking, and then they were still there when he began silence.
He passed into silence right in the middle of that stay. And nobody expected that he would continue it. He said that he would be silent for a year, and they didn't believe it because he was so talkative. Baba really was very vivacious and talked and was energetic. So I think there was skepticism as to whether he would actually get through the year. Little did they know, 44 years later, it was permanent. So right in the middle of that first long stay, and talks were given at the center of that period, that first long stay period. That's when they began. They actually ran from April 29th, 1926 until August 30th, 1927, although the great majority of them are in the earlier part of that, 1926. And it was really, really a dynamic period. So what this book really gives you is, I would call it Meher Baba's spiritual training of the men Mandalay. It was really the men. The women and the men were completely apart by then. And it was Baba, this is my understanding, Baba explaining to them a lot of what they were going to need to know over the coming decades of their discipleship with him. So it's like we get to be flies on the wall, listening in on the training, the spiritual training of the men Mandalay. And these are really the hardcore group of his original disciples. I'm sure Baba never told us who was in his first circle, but I'm sure a bunch of them were there. And it's not a organized collection like a course or anything like that. The sequence of lectures is not especially meaningful. It wasn't like that. Other things were. We're working right now on a series of talks to the Meher Ashram boys that were an organized sequence of talks, actually. These aren't. But they're whatever Baba wanted to talk about that day, but they weren't just random chit-chat either. Baba really took them seriously, and quite obviously the Mandali did too. And they were usually focused on a topic or a theme or group of closely interrelated themes. Baba would really make sure that they were all getting it. And I would say that the Tiffin Lectures are not difficult. In fact, most people who have any of you actually done more than break the cellophane yet?
Page 40.
Yeah. Page 40? All right. But you would confirm, right? Okay. Rosie and I we're in cahoots here, that it's not, that they're readable, right? Yeah, they're very readable. It's like Infinite Intelligence is, by universal consent, I would say, a challenging book. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. And not a piece of cake. But these are really quite readable and very friendly, and they're short, stuff like that. So I think they would make a nice read, actually. So, but when you get into them, you're really entering into the universe of the 1920s, which was a completely different phase of Baba's work than that out of which, say, the discourses come or God speaks. As soon as the Westerners came into the picture, everything changed. And Baba's messages took on a very different character. They became, I don't really like the word, but global. I mean, they were at first greatly simplified, I would say. No disparagement of the West intended, but the West was not focused on spiritual things as its dominant cultural enterprise. Would that be fair to say? I mean, the West was highly accomplished in science and arts and many other domains of life, but it had been centuries since religious and spiritual things were really at the center of the cultural discourse. So the interests were not there. So Baba really reoriented the way he framed his message. If you read those early messages Baba gave in 1932, they're fantastic. He speaks right to the Western mind with no condescension or alienness. None of that was there. I mean, Baba really wasn't looking down on people, for being this or for being that. And he was instantly right there. And then he built his teachings up again from that point, so that with the discourses and God Speaks, you really get a very developed and very subtle and very rich edifice of explanation. But he never did exactly go back to what he was giving in the 1920s, when he was with the people he had grown up with, the culture of his birth. And in some ways, I feel, but the avatar of the age didn't quite have to mind his P's and Q's to the extent that he did after he got to the West. Where they were all looking, oh, he's the Christ, and he had to make sure he didn't offend their ideas of what the Christ was too quickly, or because the expectations with him didn't work very well, but he would sort of change them all. So he had to be very careful when he went to the West. That changed too. His Western followers and disciples gained maturity with him, and he embraced all of that. But in some ways with these young men, I mean, they were in their teens and 20s, and he could say what he wanted, And so it was, you get that spirit of his advent, and working with this core of men disciples who were his main team in that respect. I don't know, some of you have met like the Adi and Padri. Did some of you meet Adi, Padri,
Yes.
Alaba?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Erich was actually later, of a later vintage. But I mean, actually Alaba was not a disciple then either, but Padri, Pendu was another. Who else was there from that we would have met? But I mean, they were very friendly to, pilgrims who came, but you could tell that these were men of iron. You could not break them. They were tough, and this was the crew that accepted Baba as their leader. I mean, I look at somebody like Padre. Who is somebody like Padre going to take as his master? Holy smokes! I mean, there's like nobody who could be the master of a man like that. I don't know if you've got that impression too. Like say, hey Padre, come here. It's like, you would not treat him like that. This was a giant. Who could these men have been willing to follow? Meherababa. So this was the time that he really was in these. It's like in the among the different aspects of spiritual training. In these talks, you're getting what I would call gyan. Do you know the word gyan? J-N-A-N. It means the intellectual or understanding, or your worldview, explaining to them for their minds what truth is and what spirituality is. As other aspects would be, obedience and actually doing what he tells you, or devotion, the different aspects of spirituality. Well, this would be so you might say, training on truth of values, training and understanding that you see here. That it's live, happening on the spot with them in the room. Gyan. Sometimes in older books they'll spell it G-N-Y-A-N. But the current, and in Infinite Intelligence we adopted the spelling that they were using in our source text, D-N-Y-A-N. But the current norm seems to be J-N-A-N. Gyan.
And the first N is silent.
Yeah. They have like 4 or 5 different N's in the Indic languages with different letters for each. So then that's the text we're going to be looking at. And as in the past, and as many of you seem to know, I myself like it better if people feel free to chime in or speak up. Now that may, Charlie, would it be helpful if somebody does that, if I repeat what the person says? Okay, I'll try to do that, and remind me if I don't, so that we can get it again on the video. But for you guys just to have to sit there and listen to me drone on all day at a certain point, it's sort of as helpful if you could, if you have something to say, just say it. I mean, it makes it livelier, and also you may feel more like you're taking part in the whole thing. Okay, so feel free. I'd like it to be informal. Okay, you ready to launch into it? Let me just. I'd like to actually read through the little write-up I did. I don't recall whether this ever got sent out in exactly this form, but I think this would give a good introduction to what we're going to be doing. Thursday Tiffin Lectures is the title embossed on the front cover of an original manuscript collection of talks that Meher Baba gave to his Min Mandali between 29th April 1926 and 30th August 1927. During this period of the first great efflorescence of the Meherabad ashram, Meher Baba's early male followers were passing through the rigors of intense spiritual training in the ways of his discipleship. Throughout the course of this program, Meher Baba complemented the intense labor and active service that his men were rendering with his own personal explanations on a wide range of topics. Most of these lectures took place on Thursdays, Guruvar or Guru's Day. Thus, Thursday Tiffin Lectures, right? Guruvar means Guru's Day, and that's the name of Thursday in Gujarati, Hindi, so forth. At the family quarters on the edge of Erangaon village or other sites at Meherabad. Now, for those of you, how many have been at Meherabad one time or another? Most of you have. You may know the dispensary, the Meherabad dispensary on the edge of Erangaon village. There's another hospital in the back of Meherabad. I don't mean that. Do you know where the dispensary is, any of you?
Yep.
It's by the road?
Yeah, it's by the road, and you're kind of into the village now. Well, that was the site of what was called the family quarters. And a whole bunch of people lived there over the years. I think the Kalchuri family did. Not Bao, but the rest of his family. And I think Ramesh Jungli did. And it seems like everybody and his brother lived there at one time or another. But this was the first use of that, where Kaka Shahani, one of Baba's disciples, I would say, was living there. So Baba would go there on Thursdays with his mandali. In these intimate settings, Baba's early men would gather around him as he discoursed, first with chalk and slate, and later through the alphabet board. You know that for a year and a half, Baba was writing, right? You're aware of that? This is right after his silence, he would actually write with chalk and slate. And then in 1927, he gave that up too. On themes and subjects that they were going to need to understand during the years and decades ahead. Records of the talks were noted down by Baba's secretary, Chanji. This was indeed a unique one-time opportunity. After this brief period, Meher Baba never again gave such sustained and concentrated attention to the knowledge or gyan aspect of the training of his Eastern disciples. Baba was really focused on them at this time. After this period, they were kind of on their own, right? Baba would be focused on everyone but them, and they had to sort of do their job, and if they, it wasn't easy being Baba's mandali, but he really got personalized work with them for this period. Prepared under the auspices of the Avatar Meher Baba Trust, and just released by Sharia Foundation, Tiffin Lectures affords readers today with the opportunity to become, as it were, flies on the wall, listening in on these charged sessions between the Avatar of the Age and his first generation of mandali, conducted by Ward Parks, one of the editors of Tiffin Lectures. This is talking about this very session. The two-day seminar at Meherabad gives introduction to this new original collection of words and messages by the Avatar of the Age, the great majority of which have never been made public before. The first part of the seminar, that will be what follows this morning, will review the history of the early Meherabad ashram in the late 1920s and the discourses and messages which Meher Baba gave out then, including his book, In God's Hand, Infinite Intelligence, Tiffin Lectures, Baba's series of explanations to the Meher Ashram boys in 1927-28, and his articles in the Meher Message, published between 1929 and 1931. All of this was discourse material Baba gave out during this early Meherabad period. The heart of the seminar will be devoted to close reading and immersion in selections from the Tiffin Lectures themselves, which delve into themes and subjects of many kinds. The final segment will survey the sources used in the compilation of Tiffin Lectures. This will be tomorrow, the later part. The editorial principles employed in the authentication and establishing of its text, and the basis for asserting that the words and messages in this book can rightly be attributed to Meher Baba's authorship. I really do feel a commitment to talking about this, and I find that even though most of Baba's lovers are not textual scholars, that's a safe statement, and even though there might be some, if you've ever looked at the endnotes in this book, there are like 50 or 60 pages of dense textual endnotes. And it's possible that you might skip one or two of those in the course of your reading of the Tiffin Lectures. Despite that, I do find that most Baba lovers really do care about the underlying issue, which is, this is being presented by the Avatar Meher Baba Trust as a collection of Meher Baba's words. Well, are they really Meher Baba's words, and on what basis do you say that? And I think that is a very fair question and a very good question. And I do find that Baba's lovers, many are concerned about that question and are quite capable of understanding the essential principles of the whole thing. And I myself feel it's really important in our Baba culture to have an understanding of this, because there's every likelihood in the coming years and decades that all kinds of nonsense is going to get put out there saying Meher Baba said this and Meher Baba said that. And people will need to have some critical awareness about this. And I think it's helpful to know that there actually is a major branch of scholarship devoted exactly to questions of this kind. It's textual scholarship, which happens to be my field. Now, just the fact that I'm a textual scholar doesn't mean that I've done a good job. It may be utter nonsense anyway. So you don't have to just believe what anybody says. But I just wanted to put it, explain a little bit about all of this, which I actually do find Baba lovers to care about. Maybe not everyone, but many do. Since Tiffin Lectures has only just been published, the presentation will be framed in terms accessible to participants who have not read the book, like everyone here. Mm-hmm. Although I've read the book, I think I can say that. The publication of Tiffin Lectures nonetheless stands as a signal event. These lectures will almost certainly occupy an important place in the body of Avatar Meher Baba's core messages and discourses for centuries to come. So this is an exciting moment in the history of the dissemination of the Avatar's message to the world. All are cordially welcomed and invited to attend. No prior background is necessary. And if you have some question or point you want to bring up, don't feel embarrassed that, oh, this is a stupid question or things like that. A lot of times, the stupid questions are precisely the questions that other people have got too. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Efflorescence.
Yes, flowering, burgeoning, blossoming. Yeah. That was the word used up earlier about the efflorescence of the Meherabad ashram. And as I'll be going over, this was a booming period for early Meherabad. It's amazing all that went on, starting in 1925 for about 3 or 4 years. And then Baba kind of closed it down to a considerable extent. And now these are the general topics. So I just did this up. I mean, we'll see how closely we stick to this, but this morning I was going to start with the history. Here, I can expand some of it. I think most of the slides will be more readable. The history of the early Meherabad ashram, 1923 to 1929, and then literary works from the early Meherabad period. There was really a lot of discoursing that Baba did, and also a lot of the Mandali were compiling diary material. There's really quite a bit of it. And then these are just some topics. I'm not at all sure I'm going to follow it in this way, but okay. Well, we'll come to that when the time comes. And then the last part will be problematics associated with what we call Meher Baba's words. That is to say, if you say these are Meher Baba's words, what exactly do you mean? And one significant point in this respect is that, in fact, Meher Baba was silent. So he didn't speak any words except for the one word, whatever your view is on that. And that really is relevant to the whole body of material that we call Meher Baba's words. On the need for critical editions, on the editing of the Tiffin Lectures, and transparency in public presentation of Baba's books. And let me just, right now, just show you something we'll look at more later, but oops, is that going to work? Oh yeah, it is there. This is up on the Trust website, and one of the things that we're doing with books like this is that there's going to be different information about it. And for example, if you were looking at a particular Tiffin lecture and wanted to see, well, what are the sources for this? There's a lot of stuff in the book itself about that. There's really quite a lot. And one of it would be the endnotes. And if you went onto the website and clicked on endnotes, and I know that everybody is just dying to know where the source material for the lecture of 1st July in endnote 4 is. I know that's what brought John Page here. I know this is that very question. Yeah. So you could go right here and you could click right on that and it would open and the page is there. So all the sources are online and accessible in this way, in many other ways. So in the last session, I'll be talking more about some of these things. Part of the purpose of this is being transparent, and also it's just to make, this is actually the source material, all this stuff. And this edition has been compiled on the basis of that source material. Yes?
Is that source material Chanji's notes?
This particular one is a typed up version. This is actually TTLFF is the abbreviation. Thursday Tiffin Lectures from the Phyllis Frederick collection. This is actually what we came to view as our primary source for Tiffin Lectures. And it appears to be a write-up based on Chanji's diaries, yeah. The whole of Tiffin Lectures appears to be based on Chanji's diaries. The diaries are lost after October 1926, so we don't know for sure, but very, very probably it must have been him, and there's no other real likely candidate. Do you know who Chanji is, by the way? Chanji is, I'll show you a picture of him presently, but Framrose Dada Chanji is his name, and he was Meher Baba's secretary from the time that he joined Baba, I think in 1924, until he died in 1944. And he was a very industrious secretary indeed. He was always taking notes, and there were a number of important diarists. A diarist, somebody who keeps a diary, in the early years. Chanji wasn't the only one. There's Adi and Ramju and Nader Shah and other people. But by far the most important was Chanji.
You mentioned that the students at Remastering, those lessons were also recorded. Is that by Chanji?
Yeah, he's asking about, I should have to remember to repeat questions, about the talks to the Meherashram kids, which is what I'm working on right now. That's the current project. And unfortunately, we haven't found evidence yet as to who took down the notes. So,
You said the notes were lost, so how are they?
The Chanji's diaries are missing from October 1926 on. We have all of the diaries up through then, though, which is like 75% of the Tiffin Lectures. So most of it we have. But after that we don't. So The sources got lost somehow. But I'm very confident they're Chanjis. Everything before that is, for sure. So,
Did you mention Phyllis Frederick collection?
that's what this is from. Yeah. She left her papers with the Pearsons, and we found it was a real shock, I think in 2013, as I was preparing for the Meher program, and I just asked Chris if I could take a copy of the Meher Message. That's an early magazine published in those days, 1929, 1931, just to sort of show to the group in the same way that I just showed you all the Tiffin Lectures. And in looking for it, we found this, and it was, if I had been a maiden in a 19th century novel, I would have swooned. I practically did as it was. I couldn't believe my eyes. Yeah. But we'll come to that presently. Yeah. Yes.
So these are Phyllis's notes taken directly from Chanji's diary?
No, these are Chanji's diaries, and his types up themselves. Adi sent them to her. Baba told Adi to send.
These are actually Chanji's typing work.
It could be. I'm not totally sure who did the typing, but it's Chanji's compilation. Of that I'm quite sure.
Somehow it ended up in Phyllis's collection.
Yeah. I think Baba told Adi to send her second copies of everything.
Okay.
And here's the joke. We have the first copy. When some of you are dinosaurs of my generation, and will remember when we were going to make copies, we would use a carbon copy. Remember that? I think there were still dinosaurs on the earth back then. And so, you'd type, and your back would be the carbon copy. So the front top sheet copy of Tiffin Lectures, of the final draft, was found at Meherabad. I'll be giving that story soon. And you would think that the front top sheet copy would be the most important one for textual editors. But if you thought so, you would be wrong. Because the carbon copy got filled in. The diagrams are missing. There are all sorts of blank spaces. They're called lacunae, a gap in a manuscript, to be filled in with handwriting. Almost always Gujarati script. The typewriters, of course, didn't have that facility in them, so they would handwrite them. And they didn't do it on the top sheet copy, which we had at Meherabad. They did it in the carbon copy. And so I had been racked and tormented for 15 years by not knowing, trying to figure out what those words could be, and using every expedient imaginable. And then, lo and behold, Phyllis had it. All along, it was sent to her. So her copy is more valuable than the original, than the front cover copy is. That was one of the big surprises, as I say. So now, here's coming into some of the history then. So then, a lot for this part of the weekend. So get on your. We all get on our magic carpets and leave Los Angeles 2017. It can take care of itself for a couple hours. And let's go back to Meherabad in the 1920s when Meher Baba was first making that his ashram. Let me see. So this is what he looked like back in those days. Good-looking devil, wasn't he? So here's a general chronological framework of what we're going to be covering. And I would call this the early Meherabad period, 1923 to 1929. May of 1923, Meher Baba visits Meherabad for the first time. May 1923 to January 1925. Gamala Yoga and other early settlement activities amidst frequent whirlwind travels. Do you know what Gamala Yoga is? If you buy a standard reference on yoga, you won't find it there. You know what a Gamala is? Yeah. Those metal pans, sort of trays, and sort of laborers there. That's kind of very low caste work in India. You'll see them like building roads or building houses and stuff, and these metal pans, they'll carry them on their head and throw dirt and rocks and stuff like that in construction work like that. That's a Gamala. And Meher Baba's early disciples were, for the most part, I would say middle class, verging on upper middle class, say middle class people. A lot of them were Zoroastrians, and the Zoroastrians at that time under the British Raj were tended to be very successful and prosperous, not the titans of finance. They might be now, some of them, but had done well. And the British also favored them because the British were trying to deal with an empire comprised of 80% Hindu, 20% Muslim. And the Zoroastrians had the convenient attribute of being neither one of those. And also susceptible to being hated from both ends. So perfect, right? In other words, they could have a minority within India that was very accomplished, very well educated, and that would be loyal to them, the British. So I'm being a little bit cynical, but the British were a bit cynical too. And so the Zoroastrians tended to be selected by the British oftentimes to help run the empire in India. So a lot of these young men were of this religion and of this ethnicity from Persia originally, and would be expected to have good careers. And most of them wouldn't go into government. Baba's chums weren't doing that, but they, would run businesses and stuff like that. So he had a good core of that. And there were also a bunch of Muslims in those days. It seems like not long after that, the number of Muslims in Baba's immediate following was diminished. But in the 20s, there were quite a bunch. And also Hindus. So Hindus, Muslims, Zoroastrians who were pretty well educated and had good prospects in life, stuff like that. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that, doing this kind of work with Gamalas was not what they were accustomed to. And of course, Meher Baba was instantly going to get over any kind of prejudices like that. They had not such prejudices had not a chance of survival if you were one of Baba's mandali. So Gamala Yoga was a kind of a rueful, comic term for the sort of work Baba was getting them to do. Probably Dr. Ghani or somebody. In other words, it's not a yoga in any conventional sense. So then in 1925, in January, Baba settled in for, he made it his permanent ashram, it looked like, and that ran until November 1926. So that's the first long stay. In early Meherabad, from one year to another, there would be huge sea changes. So one year is nothing like another year. Like a lot of you here would have known Esfandiar Vasali, right? A lot of you met Esfandiar. Well, that was 1927 to 1928. It was nothing like this 1926 at all. So big changes it was so dynamic around Baba, and constantly he would have new phases and everything would be completely altered. So then there was a break in November of 1926, where it looked like he was dissolving the ashram. It looks like it was finished. And I call it the Lonavala interlude. But then, in December 1926, he came back and started it all up again. And this is the second long stay until May 1928. And December 1928 through early 1920, and May through December 1928, Meher Baba moved the Meher Ashram to Toka, which is 40 kilometers away. Probably some of you have been to Toka, little town on a river, a little bit north of Meherabad, Meherabad. And then he moved back in December and slowly began to dissolve the Meher Ashram and the Prem Ashram, which existed by that time, and began to close things down. And that was really the end of the great early efflorescence of Meherabad. The focus really shifted. And in 1931, Baba went to the west for the first time, and that was a whole new phase that was opened up. This is the general framework of the period. Here's just some pictures. We'll go back to this in a minute. Any of you recognize that building? Actually, it's not. Oh, Old Mandalay Hall. Not the main Mandalay Hall. That's right. So this is, now it's called the Dharamshala. You can see long, wide horizons. Well, you can't see them now. For one thing, there are all sorts of buildings that have gone up all over the place. And right here is where the new Mandalay Hall is. You know Mandalay Hall, Lower Meherabad? I'll show you a map in a minute. But that was built in 1948, much after this. But people still stay here. This is the Dharamshala. Pilgrims will stay here. And this road is still there. It goes around, then comes up this way. And there's another road that goes around to that side. And in behind you'll find the Rahuri cabin and the Savage kitchen, which is I'm a savage, in fact, of that kitchen. Now this is, in fact, let's take a look at the map. This is, okay, I know it's a little bit, I can expand it, but this is the highway, this is going towards Ahmednagar, right? I'm hoping most of you have been there and will have some idea what we're talking about. And Erangam will be up here, up this way. And this is where that building we just looked at is. This building here is right there. We're calling it the old bungalow. Mandalay Hall now is there. Let me see. This is Galore Shah's tomb. Do you know Galore Shah's tomb? A saint who was buried there just before Baba came. And I think this is Padri's workshop. Or no, maybe it's not. Let me see if I can read that. It might be I was wrong. This is it's called the Upasani Sarai, which is a Dharamshala. Do you know what a Dharamshala is? It's it's like a hostel for spiritual pilgrims. So if you're, in those days, if you were going to the tomb of a saint, the worshippers of that saint would create a little place where you could spend the night and have some food. So they had created this, named after, as you might divine, Upasani Maharaj. And let's see, this is the, I think that's the table cabin, which is not located there now. This is the Jopari. You remember the Jopari? That little hut that was constructed very early during Baba's stay there, where he began his silence and did other things like that. And so the table cabin was right by the road in those days. It got moved after a while. Of course, the old Pilgrim Center would be down here somewhere. like that. But here's what may be striking is that a lot of the hub and center of Meherabad in those days was across the road, actually, up here, which now is empty. Now there are historical markers telling you where these buildings were. But at that time, a lot of the life of Meherabad was here. And these are the railway tracks right there. You probably remember the railway tracks. But this is what was called the Sai Darbar. And it was kind of a big meeting hall. They didn't have walls, just a sort of a very provisional kind of construction. This is a little seclusion cabin. We'll see photos of it in a minute, where Baba would go into seclusion. And he wrote some of the book there. He also wrote it in the table cabin. That was another place that he would use for that purpose. This is the Hazrat Babajan's school building. This is what's called the post office. And do you know what happened to the post office? Any of you?
Wasn't that the beginning? They took it for Eric's.
They'd what?
Did they take it, some of it for Eric's room?
No, that's the Mananash cabin. They built the Samadhi. They tore it down and the stones were used for different things. But if you see, we'll look at the post office in a second, and this look of the stones may be familiar. You'll see them right there at the Samadhi. And this is what's called the Makane Khas, which is the house of the chosen ones. Baba gave this name, honoring his disciples, because it was their dormitory. It was the men's dormitory, basically. The post office in those days was where Mera and the women stayed. People shuffled around from one era to another. And this is like a little family quarters. This actually is the family quarters that has been moved onto this map from over here somewhere. Is where it's actually on the edge of Erangel. But to put it in the map, it was put there. So this is the look of Lower Meherabad, especially in 1925. Actually, like the Sai Darbar got constructed between, I think, from May 1925 and was there for about a year. The Makane Khas, likewise. So these buildings were built during this Gamala yoga phase, because they really were carrying a lot of stuff in Gamalas and building buildings. And also they had to clear out a lot of the underbrush and kill the scorpions and snakes, and because it was kind of a primitive place in those days. And so up the hill, this is an image up the hill, 1927-28, and the main point I'd want to make about it is that the hill was not really much used in 1926. It really came into play the next year. In May of 1927, if you keep these years separate, the Baba started the Meher Ashram. And the Meher Ashram is the actual name of that boys' school where Baba got students from Bombay and Iran and other places to attend. I keep mentioning Esfandiar Vasali because a lot of you would have known them. Alaba also was in the Meher Ashram, and a lot of other boys, some of them, the real stars of the period were people we never met, Chota Baba and Ali and so forth. So it was really in 1927 that the hill became the focus, because the schoolboys came, a bunch of them came in July of 1927. And you know how Baba was when some new phase came along and Baba's attention was turned there. He would forget everything else. It would seem like it. And so Baba, what about me? Well, you just had to sort of, roll with the punches on that. So the men, actually the women Mandalay were feeling, Baba never sees us, he doesn't care about us anymore. There are all sorts of stories about that. And I think for the men it was the same, except that they were his hands and feet through whom he would do work. But he wasn't focusing his attention on them one bit. It was all in these school kids. And that led to the explosion. I never know the good phrase for this, an explosion of love that happened in December, early January 27, 28, among some of these school kids. And that led to the creation of the Prem Ashram in 1928. So the hill was really the central locus for a lot of this. But that is really a phase after the Tiffin Lectures. The Tiffin Lectures, these boys were not in the picture. There are two of these Tiffin Lectures in August 1927, but all the rest are before that. So we're really in quite a different phase in the Tiffin Lectures, where the Mandalay were Baba's focus, very much. It's like Baba was really trying to, I don't know, get them up to speed and give them a training and the knowledge that they would need, because then that was it. After that, they had to kind of come along for the ride and be useful, and they could sit in on discourses if somebody else was there who Baba was discoursing to, and Baba would discourse to them too sometimes. But they were not the center of attention anymore. That was over. Really from about the middle of 1926 on. Right here. There was this little, we'll have some pictures of it. They didn't have the domed structure yet. That was 1938. There was a little thatched kind of hut there, and it was very much a focus of Baba's work. He would go into what's now the crypt and would do seclusion work. In fact, in 1927, he was in there for a long period doing seclusion and fasting. So right from the beginning, that was an important place. The dome structure was constructed, in 38, a good bit after this. I don't know who built it. Padre could have been, but a lot of them were real hard, like Pendu. They were hard workers, these guys.